All right,
Raise
all
the
right, all
roof.
right. It is Wednesday night, 7 p.m. Finishing up our little 30-second dance that we do in the background while the countdown's going on.
Which I can do this
And
week because my neck isn't suffering. Last week I had that stiff neck and it was not, it was giving robot vibes, which is also fun.
yeah, and again, as it always is on 7 o'clock on Wednesday night, it is the cannabis conversation. But this is the second Wednesday of the month, so we will start off as we normally do on the second Wednesday of the month with our general public meeting. We're going to go over some of what's going on at the federal level, a little touch on state level, and we're going to move rather quickly through that tonight because Vaughn has a special guest on for us tonight that we'll be talking to in just a little bit. Let me click around to my little clickers and buttons here. I see we've got to start the meeting like we normally do, and that is to state that all of our meetings are an environment of education and awareness and are not an open market for the sale, purchase, or distribution of cannabis. We do not encourage or condone illegal behavior of any kind. Also, as we like to do at this point, we're going to remind you to follow our social media pages. As you see there, the SC NORML on Instagram. Also, really important, really, is subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click that notification bell so that you can get notifications when we're going live or notifications that the live has been scheduled. And also, of course, we do a lot of our posting to the Facebook page that we have out there. So don't forget to like there and kind of get notifications from that for all the breaking news, a little bit about what we'll talk about tonight. Also, we want to ask you to support our sponsors as well. Go ahead and visit our website at scnormal.org. Click onto the sponsors page and go and check out our sponsors. Looks like we're still kind of brewing with a couple of new ones in the work and offering some new sponsorship opportunities coming up as well. With that said, I'm going to kind of kick it over here to, oh, what button did I just push? I'm going to kick it over here to VP and say, hey, VP, what's going on tonight?
Well, I'm going to have to kick it right back to you, Scott, because my husband's at the door and the screen door is locked. You know, that mom life and wife life. I'll be right back. And dog mom life. I'll be back.
And that, folks, is the fun of a live podcast. You never know what's going to happen or when it's going to happen. So stay tuned. We might even get to see Mecca in a minute. We don't know. Anyway, most of what the agenda is tonight, and I'll go ahead and I'll kind of hit that up for y'all if I could find the right button. There it is. As we usually do on the second Tuesday, we're going to be talking about national level happenings, whatever might be happening at national level with the cannabis scene, a little bit of chit chat on South Carolina, more relating to national, to be quite honest with you, than what's going on statewide. And then VP's back. What else are we talking about tonight, VP?
Yes, I am back. That mom life, it don't stop. So today we have a very special guest. We talked about this last week. So we talked about a study, and I'll just pop it up real quick and we'll talk about it a little bit later. The impact of recreational cannabis markets on motor vehicle accident, suicide, and opioid overdose fatalities. We went through the results of this last week, went over some highlights. But today we are also super, super fortunate to be able to have one of the authors of this particular study, Dr. Samantha Marinello. I hope I said her name right. And she is going to be in the scene. She's actually already here, but she's in the shadows. You cannot see her right now, but she will be here later on for an interview. And she definitely insists that we call her Sam. So we really appreciate it and appreciate her time. It's going to be super, super dope. No pun intended. But it's going to be great to hear what she has to offer and just her perspective, being on that kind of the studying side of things and discussing topics that we talk about all of the time. Also, another element too of this is just going to be that, you know, I think it's really important, especially in a state like South Carolina, where we're still in that prohibition, that it's important that we understand the kind of work that goes into a study, right? Because we hear that a lot. We hear, well, you know, legislators say, well, this study this and this study that. And I think that being able to talk to someone who actually has went through the work and the process of it is also going to help us and our viewers understand a little bit more about what goes into that. So that's what we've got. Those are some juicy tidbits for later on in this show.
All right. Well, that's a perfect time to sort of transition into our first cannabis trivia question this week. So we might as well get right to it. It is a knowledge category question. For those keeping score, it is a 30-point question. And the question is, Apple has removed what chart-topping game that let you, quote, become the biggest weed dealer in town, unquote? Is the answer Hempire, Weed Farm, or Weed Firm? Again, the question, knowledge-based, 30-point question. Apple has removed what chart-topping game that let you become the biggest weed dealer in town? Hempire, Weed Farm, or Weed Firm? Before we get to the answer, I'm going to take this opportunity to mention that in our fundraising efforts, this is a great opportunity for you to sponsor our trivia questions. If you'd like to have your business mentioned during this segment of the show, reach out to us through the contact page on our website, scnormal.org, and we'd be happy to let you know what the opportunities are for sponsoring the trivia question on our Wednesday Cannabis Conversation. With that, we're going to get right back to the, oh, look, I get to push another button. Let's see if I can find the right button. Answer. We're going to get back to the cannabis trivia question. Answer. Again, knowledge-based, 30-point question tonight. Apple has removed what chart-topping game that let you become the biggest weed dealer in town? Hempire, Weed Farm, or Weed Firm? Before I answer it, let me look and see if anybody answered in the comments. I do not see an answer yet. The answer is Weed Firm.
Weed Firm. I didn't guess that. I didn't get that one either. I have a copy of the board game Weed Farm, and I played Weed Farm on Facebook, but I don't remember that ever being on Apple. Of course, that's awesome.
And Hempire, I think, is a whole completely different digital game. I don't know that one. Anyway, Weed Firm was the answer on that one tonight.
Well, I'm gonna pop in and say hello to some folks in the chat. What's up? Hey, Jennifer Henson, what's going on? Good to see you. Rep where you guys are at. Well, I know that you guys are in South Carolina, but just for all the visitors listening and watching. Hi, everyone. Josh, we love a good pun around here. Love a good pun. Bobo out there in Facebook world, what's up? What's going on? Ahoy, ahoy there, matey. And we've got Taco Tuesday. We know that face. What's going on?
Hey.
Hi, y'all.
Welcome.
Hi. Hello. Awesome. Always glad to see everybody out there saying what's up and giving us some greetings. We do what we do for you. I am going to start, we're going to start acting more like YouTubers out here. And I'm going to say, hit that like button. Hit that like button, hit the notification bell, and subscribe, share to your friends, things of that nature. We're definitely trying to spread the word out here. Oh, look, and we got a little like. Thank you, Facebook world. All right, YouTube world, come on up there. All right, Scott, kick it back to you.
All right, going to roll into it. I don't know what happened to the banner that I was looking for. We may have deleted it for some particular reason. Anyway, national update on what's going on in the national news, federal level. One thing and then another little tidbit I'll talk about slightly. I just want to open this up on my page in front of me so I have it in front of me and know what I'm talking about. But there was a federal bill that was just, there it is, find the right one. Bipartisan effort to improve veterans' access to medical cannabis introduced in Congress. This is a bipartisan bill. It was introduced by and co-sponsored by Representative Brian Mast, a Republican out of Florida, and Representative Earl Blumenauer, a Democrat out of Oregon, along with 15 other co-sponsors at time of introduction. But they've reintroduced, we've seen this bill in the last session, have reintroduced the Veterans Equal Access Act, also now, I guess, numbered HR 2431. This bipartisan legislation expands and facilitates medical cannabis access to military veterans suffering from chronic pain, PTSD, and other serious medical conditions by allowing physicians affiliated with the Department of Veterans Affairs to recommend cannabis in compliance with state laws. Boom, federal level legislation. I believe that is, oh geez, I haven't looked now. Might be the fourth piece of legislation filed federally. And we'll keep you posted on what goes on with them. But at this point, nothing else new at the federal level. I do want to kind of point out, because we are talking federal level, we posted it to our Facebook page a little earlier today. It was a marijuana moment article, and I'll go grab that link for you here in just a second as I share this. Buttons everywhere, buttons. There we go. We like to talk about Nancy Mace on the show just because, again, we both Vaughn and I are in her district here. GOP Congresswoman touts new poll showing majority support for marijuana legalization in South Carolina. Poll just came out, I believe it was yesterday. And I'm trying to find the new link to it. I thought I had the link open somewhere. I must have closed it. Let's see if this is the new or the old Winthrop report. This was the old one from 5 months ago. But basically what this is a Winthrop report. It went through a number of different categories, but included in those categories was legalization of medical marijuana for both medical and or recreational use. And okay, they have the report information brief right here. The survey from Winthrop University, which came as state lawmakers work to advance medical cannabis legislation, found that 3 in 4 adults, 76%, backed the reform, including 80% of Democrats, 72% of Republicans, for medical use here in the state. For recreational use, I believe the number was closer to 76, 56. Here's that number right down below. Support for adult use was about 56%, a little higher on the Democratic side than on the Republican side, but again, better than half of the voters that were queried in this survey supported recreational as well. And as Josh says down here, safe access for all. Thank you for that, Josh. So I wanted to bring that up that, Nancy is talking about that. We mentioned last week when we were talking about the opening of her local Mount Pleasant office here in Charleston area, that she is talking about reintroducing her States Reform Act. As a matter of fact, I did see another Marijuana Moment article where she was talking about that at an Americans for Prosperity gathering or something recently as well, and talking about her States Reform Act. But wanted to share that with you a little bit. I don't know what, if any, that survey will have to do with state legislation. As all of you know, or most of you know, the medical bill here in South Carolina, the Compassionate Care Act, is kind of stalled again until next January, is my understanding. One of our regular listeners was talking about a special legislation list, and I did look into that a little bit, but it's my understanding that this piece of legislation did not make it to that special list to be automatically transferred on over to the House. And again, if it had, the House wouldn't act on it until the beginning of next session. But I think it's going to stay where it is in the Senate until next session. So looky that.
The saga continues.
After. The saga continues. Yep. I got nothing else for you statewide or federal level at this point. I will follow up at the end of our program with a little bit more of what's going on here. Of course, 420 is not very far down the road, so I'll be telling you a little bit about what we've got going on as far as activities and fundraisers this month. But in the meantime, we're going to kind of move on and let VP take control of the show.
All right. This is exciting. I'm excited. I got the scheming hands, but these are good scheming hands. No bad scheming today at all. DJ Gamecock in the comments. Howdy, hey, howdy, hey. You're just in time because we are about to get into an interview that I'm really excited about. I'm ready to definitely nerd out over data and things of that nature. But I am really, really excited to introduce to you all our guest for the evening. We're going to go ahead and bring on in Dr. Samantha Marinello. She's awesome. And I am going to I'm going to boom, pop her in. And then I'm going to give a little bit of a bio before she says hello, because, you know, you got to give flowers where flowers are due. So here we go. Bam. All right. Samantha Marinello completed her PhD in Division of Health Policy and Administration in 2022. She is a postdoctoral research associate at the University of Illinois, Chicago. She has experience in policy evaluation, biostatistics. Her prior education includes an MS in biostatistics from the University of Illinois, Chicago, and a BA in mathematical economics from Colorado College. She's interested in studying the effectiveness, differential impacts, and unintended consequences of public health policies that aim to improve health behaviors. During her PhD program, she's worked on a large-scale project evaluating sugar-sweetened beverage taxes in the U.S. That's very interesting. And has taken leadership as first author on 4 manuscripts. Her dissertation research examines the health impacts of commercial recreational marijuana markets, as well as social media activity of recreational dispensaries. Prior to beginning her doctoral studies, Ms. Marinello, oh my goodness, I'm telling you, I'm going to get it. I get it. She worked as a healthcare management consultant and a research assistant for multiple NIH-funded studies. Additionally, she was a teaching assistant at the ICPSR summer program in quantitative methods for a course on longitudinal data analysis. Here she is, Samantha Marinello. Hello. Thank you.
Hi, nice to be here. It's great to meet you too, and I'm excited to be here to talk about the study. Thanks for bringing me on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for doing what you've done. And I'm just really, really excited about it. Like I said, last week we talked about the study, really went through the highlights of just like the results. And I've sent along some questions, viewers, just so that you know, we sent along some questions already. And Sam, as she has requested that we call her, is really like, I'm just, especially knowing that you have this background in talking about recreational marijuana just in general, and just the overall, it's fascinating, just like we said in the bio, the idea of something that's meant to be for good, and kind of seeing what are the unintended consequences. And one of the things that I like the most about the study is that there isn't even in the conclusion, you don't bring about this demonizing. It's much more of, here are things that are happening, and here are ways that we could potentially avoid this, or at least work on this. And I think that that's that's a fair outlook. So I'm just going to go ahead and get into these questions, because I would love to know just where your brain is at. And the first is, what inspired you to study this particular subject, and why do you feel like this study matters?
No, that's a great question. So, I mean, I've been really interested in cannabis policy just in general, like way before I studied public health. Back in 2012, I was actually living in Colorado when Colorado and then also Washington legalized recreational use and then also sales, which huge deal because these are the first jurisdictions globally
Right.
to legalize. So, but why? And I live in Illinois. Illinois recently legalized also recreational cannabis, but because these policies are just so new, and these policies are always evolving over time. I don't think we totally completely understand potential health benefits and also potential health harms. And the reason why we may expect recreational markets, like allowing for the sale for adults 21 and older, to have health consequences, is that there is some evidence in the literature currently that suggests that there has been an increase in adult use in states that have legalized markets. The evidence on adolescents is pretty mixed. Some studies have found an increase, some studies have found even a decrease or no impact. But specifically for this study, I was really interested in the 3 outcomes, because these outcomes, deaths from motor vehicle accidents, suicide, and then also opioid overdose, these are linked or associated with cannabis use in some way, but we don't really know if there's actually a causal relationship potentially. So there definitely needs to be more evidence to understand, are these associations likely to be causal? Like, if we do increase access substantially to adults, are there some are there health harms, and if so, like, what can we do to try to prevent those? And then if there are health benefits, maybe we can exploit those. And in the case of potentially cannabis being used as a substitute for opioids, this could potentially influence future policies for states to increase access. So
no, that makes a lot of sense. We talk a lot about we talk about harm reduction, but that's a very broad stroke of a lot of different things. And I think that another thing that we talk about a lot too is responsibility, right? So just because, and I think when it comes to legalization, sometimes the conversations are like from opposing sides, is this idea that legalization means that there's lack of responsibility, and we don't feel that way. Like, there's still, legalizing doesn't mean that work stops. Like, we still, to keep people safe, there's still so many different forms of harm reduction. And I think that that's really smart how you approached it in that way. I think that that's very advantageous. Why recreational markets versus medicinal? Do you think that the recreational markets would have just this bigger pool that you could sample, or what was the thought process between that?
So, I think just like theoretically, like cannabis, like actual having cannabis markets where people can, go just walk 5 minutes to a dispensary. Like, I've been to Denver recently, and there's like dispensaries everywhere. But anyways, cannabis markets, I just think has the potential to like actually really impact use and also really change norms around cannabis use. So one, obviously, by increasing access, like, people no longer need to take as much time, like time and effort looking for cannabis if they're interested in buying it. Also potentially allowing people to buy cannabis in stores that are like located in just commonplace locations, like a Starbucks, or near Starbucks, or sorry, like a Starbucks or McDonald's or something. That this could potentially normalize use, destigmatize use. And then of course, compared to medical access, you when you allow for this private for-profit industry, I mean, this is maybe more years down the line, but what you're going to have, looking at the history, for example, the tobacco industry, it's likely that dispensaries and also other cannabis companies are likely to engage in a lot of marketing to try to get new consumers. And so you've all maybe seen what's been happening recently in the e-cigarette with e-cigarette use and marketing. So it's just, I think there's just so many different avenues for potentially impacting use. Not to say it necessarily will, but it just provides much greater access compared to medical.
That makes sense too. I did not even think about the marketing piece of that. When I went to Michigan, literally as soon as I crossed the border into Michigan, I saw dispensary signs probably every half mile, it felt like. I mean, it was aggressive. And that is something that is, like you said, in something like a medical state, it may not be that same way. Like they might be a little bit more reserved. The avenues of advertisement wouldn't be the same because of that medical vein. That's interesting. Largely, and Scott, you and I talk about this a lot too, because it's like, truly what's the difference between this bud being recreational and then medicinal? Like it's still the same bud, it's still the same, like you could take this flower right here, this you could take a gram in your hand and say, oh, that's medical. Oh no, it's recreational, but it's the same bud. And I think that it's interesting how a recreational versus medicinal can change like the very marketing of it and the perception of it. So very
that is a very interesting take on it that I don't think I've ever really considered.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that was brought up. And it kind of relates to, like, not long ago, I met with the head of a local business association. And the area that we're here in Charleston, South Carolina, is a tourist area. So we have a lot of food and bev. And they were relating to me that a lot of the proprietors of food and bev are sort of chomping at the bit to be able to start infusing, edible products in their restaurants and bars, drink and food product, which would obviously bring about new marketing opportunities for them, to market their new infused products and things like that. So,
which would make even. Go ahead, Scott. Sorry.
I was going to say, which is just again something I had never really considered, was the marketing aspect of it.
Yeah. And can totally see how that would be, once again, the question being why does this study matter? Even more so, that's kind of bringing home to, like, especially if you're going to market, if you're going to go from not being able to market something to all of a sudden marketing it, that has impact on people's day to day. I mean, we are bombarded with messaging like all the time. Like there's like some insane number of how many ads we see in a day. And so this would kind of join into that.
Yeah, I mean, I was sort of born and raised in an era where you didn't see lawyers advertise on TV. It wasn't a thing. And now, especially if in our area, you see a couple of attorneys repeatedly throughout the news or whatever, always promoting. But back, I'm going to say probably 50 years ago, and I don't know when they started allowing them to advertise, but at that point, it was like, you'd see advertisements maybe in the newspaper, but this television advertising was not appropriate. Maybe, I don't think there was a law against it, but maybe it was not deemed appropriate. So
that's very interesting. Sam, you were going to say something.
Oh yeah. So one of my other dissertation papers actually did look at like social media marketing in Illinois of recreational dispensaries. And I do think it's something that will increase substantially over time, where there will be more marketing. And I think that actually, I don't talk about that in this paper at all, but I think an important, important public health policies will have limits on marketing, especially in terms of, marketing that could be appealing to adolescents or youth, like people under the age of 21.
Right.
Because it's very easy to influence that demographic. So.
Right. How long does, and I know that you've studied some other things before. And so I'm curious about how long does a study like this typically take, like for you to be comfortable enough, like I've got enough data?
Oh, well, so actually it's funny. I wrote, because I was thinking about this question. So so for me, it took a bit longer because while I was working on this study, I was actually working on 3 other studies at the same time for my dissertation. And I also was working as a research assistant and and I also taught a class. So it took me a lot longer. It took me like about 3 years to finish my entire dissertation. But I would guess that if I was maybe working a more normal schedule and I wasn't focused on too many papers, that it probably could have finished it definitely in a year or two, somewhere in there. But what can take a long time is we did request this data from the National Center of Health Statistics, and that can take a few months to actually apply for the data, and then they have to approve it. And then also when they give you the data, it's not really in the right, it's not ready to analyze. You have to do a lot of like cleaning and reformatting. Another thing that can take a really long time is, I'm sure you're aware of, is the peer review process. So actually, I submitted this paper for publication early June of 2022, and it was just published, I think, like the end of March or mid-March. No, it was early March. So it can just take a really long time, which is actually good because we did get a lot of feedback from
Right.
we did get a lot of feedback from the reviewers on the paper. So
That's awesome.
yeah.
Okay, that's great. So then the study of the hour, if you will, or of the half hour, if you will, if we can start diving into that, because that's so interesting. There's a lot of things you've said here today already that are very interesting.
You got a question from a listener.
Yep, and
Over in
it's
the
gonna
comment
feed
section.
it's gonna feed right into my next question too.
Perfect.
So this is perfect. So we have DJ Gamecock says prohibitionists in SC have claimed that passing medical marijuana will result in more deadly traffic accidents and more kids using cannabis. Most say those claims are false. And
Yeah.
then this person wants to know, what do you think of that? And that is something that I have a follow-up to that if you'd like to answer that question, because then I was going to go roll right into some of the results that you have for motor vehicle accidents. But what do you think, Sam?
Oh, yeah, no, this is a great question. So I definitely reviewed, especially early on, a lot of the medical, because like the medical marijuana research came first, it was early research. And yeah, my understanding is most studies do not find an increase in motor vehicle accident deaths with medical legalization. In fact, there was one really famous study. I just remember the first author's name was Anderson. And they found that actually there was a decrease. So that's kind of interesting. And then also in terms of, so it was motor vehicle accidents. The other one was, what was the other outcome? Oh, adolescent use, was it? Or
right. The question was about adolescent use. Yes.
Oh, adolescent. Yeah. Also, my understanding is also most studies do not find an increase in adolescent use with medical. There may be, that's the thing, is that there might be like 20 studies published on that topic, and maybe like 2 of them do find an increase, but the vast majority don't. So, it's easy for news sites to just like cite one paper that have a certain finding. So.
Very, very good point. I'm glad you said that, because that is also something, another reason why it's very helpful to have these kind of conversations with people who are doing these studies, because you're right. It's one thing to pull a study. It's also another thing to also see, like, how does that study stack up to other studies that are also within that same group or testing the same thing, and just kind of that cross-referencing piece. I think that's really great. And then DJ's asking how much of a decrease in percentage. So I think I want to follow up with you, Sam, with just asking about those different studies, and then we'll be able to kind of like deep dive into that. Do you know that off the top of your head?
I don't remember. I don't remember because it was over a year ago, but I read it. But I think one of their theories was something along the lines of that people might be, for example, like staying at home more instead of going out, which this doesn't, I was a little surprised this was their theory, given this is medical, but they were one of their theories that people maybe are staying home more instead of going out and drinking and driving, or maybe people are substituting from alcohol to cannabis, and so alcohol impairs driving ability to a much greater degree.
Yeah.
But I still would be surprised to see that from like if it's from a medical perspective.
Yeah, that would be cool. I'll definitely have to follow up with you and see what the study is, and what, we'll be able to kind of dive into that one as well, because those are good questions from the comments, and definitely a lot of things as it relates to South Carolina, a lot of things that are said within South Carolina by prohibitionists. And Taco Tuesday said probably enough for prohibitionists to bury it, talking about the decrease in things. And yeah, that's we kind of deal with that a lot. Of course, I'm sure everywhere where someone is trying to fight for something, there's always the opposing side that says, oh well, you need to think about this or that. So this is really good. And DJ says, I've read the national average was about 20%. So Next is a question that I have about the motor vehicle results, right? And so
Mhm.
I'm very curious, jumping right into that. So, okay, we know that cannabis has the ability to stay in like a user system for a prolonged period. And I'm curious about how the studies account for that. How do you account for that when it comes to those kinds of things? Like, how do you, like, if someone is involved with a deadly accident, how are you able to pull from the study, or what is helpful for you to say, oh yes, this person was intoxicated at that moment or impaired at that moment? And you do reference this in your study, but I just wanted to hear from you for the people.
Oh, no, definitely. So, like a limitation of our study, and also just a serious limitation of data, and also just of technology as well, is that, well, for our study, we don't have data on whether someone was impaired at the time of driving. We looked at just generally mortality rates from motor vehicle accidents. However, we did have controls, and we did account for trends and other, and also other economic. We also had some sensitivities where we controlled for some economic factors, but this paper doesn't provide direct evidence that they're on the individual level, like if there was actually people were impaired more, and then that led to more accidents, that led to more deaths. So however, I do think our study is consistent though with other papers on this topic that have looked at individual level behavior in driving related to cannabis. And then in general, like, you're completely right. Currently it's really difficult to determine whether someone is like driving under the influence of cannabis. A lot of states have set limits for THC in blood and urine, and also I think saliva. But basically, my understanding, just like from reading other papers, that there's really no evidence that there's actually a specific level of THC that like correlates to impairment, and these
Wow.
measures are just not reliable. So another problem is like people just aren't often even tested for this, and
Right.
oh, and one of the reason they're not tested for this is it's a lot easier to test for alcohol. So like, let's say somebody is pulled over, and let's say they used alcohol and cannabis. Well, if they are positive for alcohol, like the police officer isn't going to like be like, okay, well, let me test now for something. Like they don't really test for other drugs typically. It's
Right.
really hard. So I don't. I imagine. I believe. Like I don't know. Every state has a different policy. I believe in Illinois,
Right.
like police officers have like, um, maybe if somebody fails a test, like the different tests they do, and they smell cannabis and they find cannabis, and someone looks intoxicated, they probably factor that in. Maybe I've heard it can be really hard though to prosecute. So
Right. Right. That's definitely kind of what the wild west of cannabis is right now, especially with the different states doing different things, different laws, different restrictions. That is a fact. And yeah, I think you said some really important things in here too, that I know we speak to a lot of, is just that technology of testing, and the just how erroneous it can be from across many cases. And it is important for us to get tighter on that, so that we can properly, like, we can be even more accurate, or even more like fine-tuned with these studies, and really get to the root of whatever we need to get to the root to, or understanding some things. I am sure that doing a study like this, like, that's why I feel like doing something like this, and people who are taking the time to do studies like this, like yourself, especially in this space, like, it's a very brave thing. And it's like, it still has this kind of pioneer feel to it, because of I'm sure the lack of resources that you end up having to try to get, as the most accurate information that you want to get. But I can imagine that being difficult. But I think that I definitely hear how you all are trying to mitigate that, so that you have the results that are still going to help you define what's going on. Yeah, very, very cool. Scott, you look like you were about to say something. I'm just anticipating. Are you saying something? No? Okay. Okay, cool.
No, my mind is actually like trying to think who does a study on, the increasing number of school resource officers and how that relates to cannabis arrest of our students and getting them into the school to
Mm,
prison pipeline.
Mhm.
I
yeah,
don't know if Sam's ever done anything on that, but
that's
that's
interesting.
where
Well,
my mind's kind of going right now.
you'll have to fund a study, Scott. You'll have to fund one. No, that's really cool. There's a question in here that that Josh has. And I've got one kind of similar to this. Says, is this study done with daily smokers or occasional smokers? Do you think there would be a huge difference? I just clicked away from it. A huge difference in data collected, and I kind of have a similar question that I was trying to find when I was trying to type it to you. I was like, I don't know if I know how to properly ask this question, but I have a similar one that has to do with, like a first time user versus someone who is more experienced. Like I'm wondering if someone who is still in that term of the motor vehicle crashes and fatalities. And I'm curious if that, like someone who's not as experienced, someone who's not as educated, things of that nature, like does a result, like have you come across that in your data at all?
So with our study, unfortunately, we don't have data on like on again like if people are actually intoxicated or like and also how much
Right.
people are using. But that's a really really important question. I will say that in the introduction of the paper, um, there are a couple studies that we cite that are like larger surveys that are conducted with people who are regular cannabis users. I think I can't remember the exact definition, but people who use like multiple times a month, I believe. But the people who do use regularly versus like that there is a fairly high prevalence of cannabis intoxicated driving, and it's hard to know exactly why that is, but there was a recent study I read that's not cited in this paper that found that um, that there was a like really strong correlation between people thinking I can drive while feeling high and be safe, and then like whether they actually end up doing that. So
Mm,
um, yeah, so people have this belief like, oh, I mean, this obviously makes sense. If you have a belief that like you can be really high and also you can drive, those people are just way more likely to actually to do that pretty regularly. I think also
right.
one paper we cite, I think, yeah, and yeah, I can't remember the exact percentages, but it's fairly prevalent among regular people who are regular users.
Wow. Yeah, I when thinking about what are the things that we can do to help mitigate different things like this or negative outcomes, it makes me think about policies. Like it makes me think about, and I think this was also in your study too, about how with drinking there's PSAs, there's whole campaigns about drinking, there's all of that, and that's been there for a long time. And matter of fact, in Chicago there was a billboard that said took a dab, call a cab, So once
Mm.
again, these kind of PSAs and these educational tools that I think that with cannabis is not as it's not as frequent as we see with other things. Like there's not enough like campaigns of education about like, maybe you should start low and slow. Maybe you should, especially if you have not had this before, you don't know what your experience is like, you don't know what it may be. And I think I think a little bit more education. Talk a lot about that for like business owners, right? Like people have dispensaries, like that's a really good point of education for the consumer, like, and for a lot of consumers it's the only point of education, and that's a very valuable time so that people get the information that they need, so that that whole idea, especially in this interim where we can't really, it's just so funny, it's like we can't really tell, like you could have, cannabis affects people differently so much, so it's hard to kind of pinpoint like exactly um how it's going to affect somebody in their day to day, like, so that is definitely giving me a lot to think about, especially as we're talking about harm reduction and as we're talking about like how the numbers stack up, and we haven't even been able to really touch like suicide and opioids. So I do want to transfer into that. I know that the motor vehicle element is something that's just talked about so much here, so it is very, very interesting. But I did want to kind of mosey on over to the opioids and suicide. And actually, I think we can, especially because we're kind of pressing for time. So maybe just the results and how you felt about the results and the biggest takeaways from those for you.
Okay, sure. Yeah. So for suicide, the reason I looked into this outcome is there have been actually a lot of studies that have found an association between using cannabis and then also later developing depressive disorder, and also suicidal ideation and complete suicidal ideation attempts and completion. But there's obviously like many different explanations for this type of association. It doesn't necessarily mean that cannabis is like causing people to become depressed or whatever. So I mean, one obvious explanation is that maybe people that are struggling with mental health problems are using cannabis to self-medicate, or maybe people who especially like really young people who are using cannabis, maybe they're more likely to experience like some kind of hardship that's leading them to have mental illness, but also maybe also to also again self-medicate for
Right.
whatever's going on. So anyway, in this paper, we didn't, across every single state, we did not find any impact at all on suicide. Did not find an increase or a decrease, which I think, again, like this, I don't want to draw too strong conclusions from one study. I think there definitely needs to be more studies conducted, but I think that it suggests that, maybe there isn't really a relationship between using cannabis and suicide potentially.
Right.
So I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, definitely a good thing. And another kind of like myth buster, if you will. A lot of other factors that come into play, especially with mental health. And it's a very good point. Like if someone is utilizing something to self-medicate, like there's already something predisposed that's going on, or something that they're already dealing with, and that's to be taken into account. And I think a lot of times it's just so easy to pinpoint the blame on something that people already have as a hot topic. So that definitely interesting. And then what about the opioid use?
Okay, so yeah, I'll just start with saying that a lot of studies have found this association between where if you have increased access to cannabis, like through medical or recreational, there is an association between those policies and then reductions in opioid prescriptions and hospitalizations and deaths. And so people theorize that maybe people are, using, cannabis instead of opioids, like for example, for pain, or people who have opioid use disorder are able to like use less opioids because they can use cannabis. So that's really interesting, and that is consistent with what our study found. We did find a decrease in opioid deaths, I'll say a relative decrease in opioid deaths, which I can explain in a second. I guess the only thing that I will say is that, I do think there's pretty good evidence that this is potential, like a harm reduction. Cannabis could be a harm reduction drug, I guess, for the opioid crisis. But it's a little bit concerning because there have been some other studies that are pretty decent that actually have found either no impact, or they have found actually an increase in the likelihood of using opioids. So it's still, I think we're still not 100% sure. But I mean, the good news is that essentially in the states that had legal markets, yes, opioid deaths did increase a bit in those states, but so much less than all the states in the control. Like all the other states that were very similar and had similar trends prior to the implementation of markets. They had these like huge increases in opioid deaths, versus these states had relatively much fewer deaths. So I think that's a really good sign, and something that should be investigated further. I mean, also, states like Illinois now have the opioid alternative program, which allows access for cannabis for people that are getting opioid prescriptions. So I think that's great. But also we need to really evaluate those programs to make sure that like they're actually really working. So.
Right. For a fact. No, this very good point again, because this is again another reason why having frequent studies and having increasing the amount of studies and seeing comparing those results and things of that nature, it continues to just prove that it's extremely valuable, one, and very important, because there's also so many other things, especially when deep diving in some opioids. Like a study that I read before also talked about just kind of the feelings that people had between using opioids versus cannabis, and just how much happier, or like even something as simple as they weren't groggy the next day, or they felt like they could actually be out and about moving versus being on opioids and feeling the opposite. And I think there's also some things to think about too in terms of long-term use of opioids versus long-term use of cannabis, and even the different ways that you can utilize cannabis. And I think I'm really interested in seeing studies like that done too, to understand kind of like, once again, that longevity, like how does that affect someone in the long term, in the addictive qualities of opioids, things like that, and how that plays a factor. Very interesting. From these results and from this study, and you have studied a lot when it comes to recreational markets. I'm really interested in the marketing stuff too. So we're just going to have to, it's not the last you'll hear from me. We definitely have to talk a little bit more about that. But what do you feel like the next steps are based off of the results of your study? What are some of the things that you kind of see coming into place, or that you theorize should come into place for the industry to be a little bit stronger in harm reduction?
Oh, okay. So that's a really good question. So I think one thing that you actually already said was really educating the public about the dangers of cannabis impaired driving. I think that people maybe think it's true that alcohol impairs driving to a much greater degree than cannabis, but there are tons of studies, like experimental studies that have been conducted in labs that have, shown pretty definitively that cannabis does impair driving if somebody is intoxicated at the time of driving. And so I think that maybe some people just aren't as aware of that as we are about alcohol at this point. So I think, media campaigns for sure are really important. I also think more states increasing access potentially for people that are diagnosed with opioid use disorder, but we also need to really study to see, is this really effective at helping with that? That could be potential. A lot of states have that as a qualifying condition for medical cannabis access, including, I know, Illinois, but there are like several other states. And then I think, this isn't really related to this study, but I do think that there needs to be more public health in the future, public health regulations around marketing, as well as potentially limits on potency. There is new research coming out that suggests that like these these highly potent products that are relatively new, like dabbing, or vape pens that are like 80% THC, that those could potentially have negative health consequences. So potentially putting limits on potency might be another public health policy.
Kind of goes back to that kind of start low and slow type deal, just being in that space of understanding that, I think is effective too, or at least that's just my thought process, is that somebody like between someone who can take, you got two different people, and just like similar to drinking, there's tolerance levels vary, right? And that can also be the same in this case too. And also I think another thing too is just, cannabis has so much, way more diversity within it, just with the cannabinoids alone, right? And having a different combination of cannabinoids even the terpenes, like all of that plays a role in what the effect is on the body, on the mind, or rather the head high versus the body high, things like that. But yes, I definitely agree that I would love to see more pushes towards like just educating people. Like I think that's another thing too, is just educating people. There's nothing like that to me is kind of the most perplexing thing about prohibition, is that it's like, well, why not just educate people? Why not get real information and then educate people and equip them with that? And whenever someone tries to hold you back from being educated, that history tells us that that's kind of whack. So like they're trying to oppress you in some way, form, or fashion. So but this is really great. Thank you, Sam. I really appreciate you being here. There was a lot that I learned just from your study, and just you talking about the process, and even just your headspace about why you do what you do, why you study what you study. It really does mean a lot that you came onto the show today and definitely had the comment section on fire, people talking to each other, having some questions for each other, throwing out the stats. Like this just once again just helps our community as well. So I really appreciate it, and people saying thanks for the information. So I really appreciate you coming out. Do you have anything else that you'd like to say or recognize, or the floor is yours?
Oh, well, no, thank you. I just want to say thank you again so much for having me on. This was really great. And yeah, I mean, my study on marketing hopefully will be published pretty soon. So when it is, I could send you a copy.
Well, there we go. You might have to come on back. We might have to talk about that, especially. I mean, I got a lot to say about that. So very cool. Well, thanks. And Sam, if you don't mind hanging on a little bit, I'll bump you into the lobby, but hang on a little bit so that we can also give you a little bit more thank yous after the show. And then I'm going to kick it over to Scott so that he can give some more news that you can use. Thanks again, Sam.
Thanks.
I'm going to try this real quick at the moment, folks. So I'm going to skip the last two, the other two kind of trivia questions for tonight. We will move them on till next week. What I do want to kind of run over real quick is what's kind of going on, finish up the show with just a little info. Most of it you already know, but I'm going to share this with you anyway. As you all know, next week, 420 is up. 418 is actually our first scheduled event, but we have some events coming up next week. I don't know quite why we don't have this in order here, but April 18th, Village Idiot Pizza in Columbia on Whaley Street. I don't think I have the address right here in front of me. I am still looking for a couple of volunteers to help us fill out our hosting in the Columbia area. If you live up there, if you're a student of the U of SC, something like that. We just need a couple people to stand there with a couple of posters that talk about working to reform marijuana laws and donut sales, and some brochures in case anybody's interested to know more, for about 2 hours at a pop. We've got DJ Josh, who's going to sort of head up there or organize that a little bit for us, drop off some of the signs and brochures for folks to use. But I do need somebody to cover like the 8 to 10 o'clock shift. I do have somebody scheduled in from the 6 to 8. And if possible, I'd like to get somebody in there from 4 to 6 as well. And that way we can sort of free up Josh to do the other things that he's got on his agenda, but he can again get some of those materials out there for us to the Village Idiot Pizza. If you can volunteer, go to our Facebook page. You'll find a post there, and then a link to a volunteer form to sign up on. So definitely looking for some volunteers for that event, because we will not be able to, VP and I are a little far away from there, won't be able to get up there and host that event. So we're looking for some volunteers to do that. April 20th, 420, a Thursday night this year, the night after a cannabis conversation. So don't forget, next week, the 19th, will be our cannabis conversation. And the following evening, should I say, we are at 2 separate locations for 420. First location I'm going to mention is the Not Burger Pub up in Somerville, South Carolina. As I say, up from where I'm located. Might be down east west for you? I don't know. But great burgers. We're going to be giving away, let me find one here. We got some sploofs to give away. Let me pull one out of the package here. If you don't know what a sploof is, if I haven't told you enough times, it is a personal air filter so that when you exhale your intake, the HEPA filter traps all that smoke and smell. Be courteous to your neighbors and friends. So we're going to be giving some of those out at both of our events this year. But again, not the Knot Burger Pub in Somerville. The second location we're going to be is Low Tide Brewing on Johns Island, Charleston, South Carolina. That event runs from 5 to 9. The Knot is 6 to 10-ish. I know the Knot one's a little ishy on the end of that one. But 2 separate locations, depending on who you want to see from the board. VP, I believe, is going to be hanging out at Low Tide Brewing. I'm going to be up at the Knot.
Yes, I will.
I believe we're going to have, each of us are going to have another board member there hanging with us. Kristen will be at Knot with me. Jessica has been organizing and will be hanging out, kind of leading the show over at Low Tide for us. So they should be some good times. We want to see you out there. We'd love to see you come on by and show your support. Other event we will be at 422, which is a Saturday from noon to 4 p.m. at the Bohemian Bull on Folly Road, James Island, Charleston, South Carolina. It is a fundraiser for, I think, some other organization, good cause, whatever. But, you know, it's also a 420 market, so we're going to be showing up there. We're going to ask you to come on out and hang with us for a little while. Next thing I want to kind of mention, let me see if I can, I can't switch screens there. I got to turn this one off. Then let me switch to the other one. There we go. I'm going to share it that way. Gotcha. Also, I wanted to mention that all month long at the Knot Burger Pub in Somerville, they are doing their monthly give back. They have a special burger, what they call Birchies. Special Birchie this month called the Munchie Birchie. It's basically chili and cheese and Fritos. It is just delicious and drippy and gooey and fun. They also have 2 different drinks available. Let me see if I can open up here. The liquid marijuana, which is a coconut rum, spiced rum, melon schnapps, and some juices, and a Sweetwater strain IPA, G13 strain IPA. For any one of those items that you purchase at the Knot during the month of April, they will be donating to South Carolina NORML a percentage or an amount from each purchase. Actually, I got a message from them today, between not even counting the food and drink sales. They've done a couple of other fundraisers there this month and have already raised about $500 for us. So they're kicking it, man. Woo-hoo. Thank you to the folks at the Knot in Somerville. Also, can't forget to mention this guy with the cowboy hat and the Dozens for Cannabis campaign we are doing with Krispy Kreme as through a third-party group rise. These are called digital dozens. You go online, there's a little QR code on our sign that we show there, or of course, if you go to our website and or social media, you'll find a link to the fundraiser page. Buy yourself a dozen or 2 donuts. I'm only looking for like 420 people to buy like 1 dozen each. So, you know, come on, folks, go out there, buy that dozen. You know, it's going to help us. And I kind of like this fundraiser. And one of the reasons is Krispy Kreme has been in the news for actually donating money from their corporate level to anti-marijuana programs. And so this is a way to sort of force them to donate some of their money to a pro-cannabis legislation or organization. So get out there and kind of give it to Krispy Kreme a little bit. And they're pretty damn good donuts. I can't knock them on that. And that's kind of a bulk, I think, of what is going on this month. I don't need to show you what else do I have here. Oh, marijuana moment.
I got
Let me
one
go ahead
last
and
thing for
start this.
y'all.
There we go. What you got?
One last thing. Next week, we're going to have another interview. That's right. Interviews after interviews of amazing, awesome people. Okay. So just want to give you a little heads up here that we will have, hold on, share screen, bop, bop, boom. We are going to, if it comes up. Yes. Okay. So the founder of People of Color Psychedelic Collective is going to be in the building. This person is near and dear to my heart because this is my sister-in-law, and she's
Woo-hoo!
amazing. And her name is Ife, and she has been putting in some major work when it comes to the war on drugs. This particular group is about psychedelics. However, and I know a lot of people in this group are interested in psychedelics, but she has also done a lot of work when it comes to cannabis legalization in a lot of different areas. And so, fun fact, she is the reason I went to a drug policy conference in DC years ago. And the conference changed my life, and I said, yeah, I gotta start putting in some work for drug reform and things of that nature. So very excited to have Ife on next week. Have your questions ready. She's going to talk a lot about harm reduction and just her experiences in the cannabis space, and also a little bit about what she does now. So make sure that you all knew that. So make sure that you tuned in next week.
Excellent. I am excited. But I hate to be the one to kind of be the bearer of bad news. We got to end this, man. It's time. We're running out
I
of
know.
time. We've run a little over time. So I want to thank everybody who's joined us tonight. We always have a good crowd. Thank you for your comments and your input. We're hearing you. We're listening to you. And hopefully we can take your suggestions and make some magic with them. Don't forget to follow our social media throughout the week. Don't forget to come and visit us on 420 next week. Let's just chill, hang, and see what we can do to change some laws here in South Carolina and nationally. All right. Any last words, VP?
Don't forget to like that video, like, subscribe, share, all those things. Appreciate y'all.
All right. Appreciate y'all. Good night now. Out.